the downsides to that. I think it's kind of implicit, right? In what, yeah, I think like what, definitely in what Bethany said. Let's let in a new person. Okay. Alexander, do you mind? I'm having trouble clicking admit, if you don't mind letting this person in from the waiting room.
Yeah, they should be able to join now.
Cool, thank you. Okay, yes. So yeah, does anyone want to speak to some of the downsides of binaries? And yeah, you can do that with your voice or just in the chat. Any thoughts at all? Or maybe just the impacts? Okay, I see something in the chat. Putting people or situations in boxes, it's not as inclusive. Yeah. So I think, yes, absolutely. Thank you, Bethany. Thank you, Cruz. So I think that piece about kind of how it's a way to work through ambiguity is like a double-edged sword, right? So it's, it kind of allows us to make sense of things quickly, but it also kind of, we lose a lot of like nuance and complexity. And we know that in reality, a lot of survivors' lives, and particularly the most marginalized survivors' lives, are messy and complex, right? They've got a lot of stuff going on. Jane says it doesn't promote creative thinking or creative decision-making. Yes, absolutely. And I think a point that someone, I was very grateful that someone mentioned in the last training when we got to this slide was that binaries also kind of divide us from each other, right? When we're thinking in terms of like Black versus white, or say racially, or like gay versus straight, like that's kind of a way that maybe even marginalized people are kind of separated from each other, that we're not able to like build solidarity and build movements. Okay. So moving on. Oh, something in the chat. That's a really good point. Yes, it was not mine. I agree. It was really smart. Okay. So this is kind of, I was sort of thinking about this very abstractly, and I was really vindicated when I read this, what was it called? Like a meta, it wasn't a meta-analysis. It was a literature review of all of the qualitative studies looking that were interviewing survivors of sexual violence about their process of healing. And it looked at like 30 different studies, and it found that the themes in all of this research is that survivors found that synthesizing contradictions was the essence of healing. And so this act of like, yeah, kind of making sense of paradoxes, believing in like a seemingly opposing truths, was, yeah, like really at the crux of kind of the process of recovery from trauma for folks. And so I found that really vindicating, because yeah, I was like, okay, we're on the right track. We're gonna do this webinar series. Okay, let me just check and see how we're doing with time. Okay. All right, we are a little bit behind, so I'm gonna move through this really quickly. Okay, so I think it's really important to ask why rates of sexual violence are higher. And I think that sometimes folks, not necessarily y'all, can blame LGBTQ people for disparities, or marginalized populations for disparities in general. So let's kind of talk through the root causes of this. So queer folks and trans folks face disproportionate violence at 3 different levels. So one is systemic or institutional violence. And so some examples of that are that the trans unemployment rate is 3 times that of the general population. 13% of LGBTQ people feel they could be fired because their workplace is unwelcoming. 1 in 3 LGBTQ students miss school because they feel unsafe. Oh, I want to pause. I'm sorry. I meant to say that there's kind of like a trigger warning for this section, because it's just a lot of like distressing facts coming at you. So kind of, yeah, if you want to breathe, if you identify with this community and you want it, you're like, you know, I know about this enough, I want to step away. I think that that's valid. So moving back into the distressing facts, LGBTQ youth are more likely to experience child abuse in the home. And so all of these kind of systemic, so that previous slide, we're kind of thinking we're thinking about the family or the home as an institution in this context. And so all of these kind of systemic and institutional forces put LGBTQ plus folks in situations such as homelessness, foster care, or survival sex work that make them more vulnerable to sexual violence, to kind of predation from folks, right? Any thoughts or questions about any of that? And for some reason, I'm having trouble seeing the chat right now. So if something comes up, I would love assistance from NC CASA staff in reading it. Yeah, so feel free to kind of jump in if you think of other examples as we move through these. So then the next category is predatory violence from outside the community. And so some examples of that are hate crimes. 4% of anti-LGBTQ hate in 2017 was sexual violence. There's a specific kind of sexual violence that LGBTQ folks face, specifically lesbians and asexuals. Corrective rape is like supposedly intended to change their sexual orientation. Of trans women who interacted with police while police thought they were doing sex work, 27% were sexually assaulted. So that's an extremely, extremely high number. And of course, the demographics of, you know, trans women who are engaging in sex work because of these other vulnerabilities are a majority trans women of color. And so we have this quote that kind of, I think, gets at this idea of kind of this of predatory violence from outside the community. Across the lifespan, sexual violence is a penalty for stepping out of normative gender roles. And so we kind of see this confirmed in the data that the more gender nonconforming youth are, the more abuse they experience. There's been research kind of looking at the ACE studies, if you're familiar with those. That have found that. Okay, and then lastly, we have domestic violence or intimate partner violence from inside the community. And so rates of IPV among LGBTQ folks are at least as high as in the rest of the population, although I do want to note that abusers may not be LGBTQ, so folks who are dating bisexual people or trans people may identify as cis and straight themselves. And evidence shows that IPV is linked to life stressors, including minority stress. And so, you know, potentially when we're talking about some of these root causes, like, you know, folks maybe coming from a place of like feeling really out of control in their lives, needing to exert power and control, and that can kind of come out in their intimate relationships. Okay. Yeah, any thoughts or questions about this section? Any like additional examples or questions or? Okay. So I am going to ask for a lot of interaction coming up. So I think that yeah, I would love y'all to kind of to step up. Feel free to share, maybe turn on your cameras. There's going to be some kind of large group and some small group discussion as well. Okay, so yeah, first up we have these breakout groups. Let's see, there's something in the, oh yeah, probably in the chat. Yes, thank you, Alexander, for just kind of putting this in the chat. And we're going to be doing this really cool diagramming thing together. So I think, yeah, if everybody's engaged, we really have an opportunity to like co-create a new framework that I'll be able to share with you all after the training. So I will show you what that will look like. We're going to like be building some really cool diagrams. But yeah, for now, let me just go ahead and put you all into breakout groups. Let's see. Sorry, there's like a little, you know what? Actually, Alexander, if you don't mind doing this, my computer seems to be freezing and I'm not able to pull up all of the Zoom controls. So let's see. Okay, so we have 15 participants. Let's do like 5 breakout rooms. So there'll be 3 folks in each room. And we're gonna, we'll be in these rooms for 10 minutes.
All right, you all should have the pop-up now, so just go ahead and accept it and you'll be in your breakout room.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna move some folks around. Okay, so I'm seeing some folks are still here. Yeah, please go ahead. Do you all not see the pop-up? I know sometimes it doesn't work.
I know that Sarah said that she was on a crisis call.
Oh, that's right. I remember that is Sarah. Okay, so there's only a few people.
Yeah, so it's possible that maybe Kimberly and Maria are also on
like
calls.
tasking or something. Okay, yeah, sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay, feel free to speak up, Kimberly and Maria, if you do want to engage, and we will happily place you in a room. Or we could just work it out here. Cool. Okay, so you have like 3 groups. Thank you.
Hey, Sarah, we're in the middle of breakout groups right now. So we've got about like 3 or 4 minutes left before folks come back. So you can let me know if you would rather just kind of stay in the space and kind of hang out, or if you want us to put you in a breakout room for the last couple of minutes.
I'll gladly just hang out for right now because I'm at our busy office this week, which it was unexpected. That's why I signed up for this webinar. So I can't be as interactive as I would like.
That makes sense. Thank you for letting us know.
Oh yes, no problem. I was not, it was unexpected. So I'm at the main office and there's a lot always going on here.
Yeah, thanks for trying to make it anyway. And,
Yes.
and hanging out and participating to whatever degree you can.
Okay, yes. No, I was excited.
Cool. Thanks.
Yes.
Oh, hi, Kimberly. Yeah, we're just in breakout groups, but they are ending in a minute. So if you want to just hang on, we can all come back together. And it looks like, yeah, we also have maybe other new folks as well. So yeah, we will. Oh, yeah, the breakout rooms are about to close in 1 second. Okay. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you. Oh, it's so good to see your faces. I love it. Okay. So, yeah, and some of you are in the office, which is a lot, and you're here and you're there and everything is new. You haven't been around people in a while. It's a lot. Thank you for being here. Oh, I'm just realizing my camera's off. That's so funny. Okay. All right. I'm back. Okay. So let's do this little diagram thing. Hang on. Let me, oops. We don't want that. Let's go back to the other. There we go. Okay. So yeah, why don't we go ahead and try to answer these questions together. So does anyone want to speak to kind of what their discussion led to around how men and women fit into our traditional understanding of sexual violence and why? Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay. I thought I was so prepared. Yeah, people can start talking as I kind of load this up. There we go. We're back. Okay.
Yeah, I can start. We sort of talked about the history of the violence against women movement and how that created a lot of like funding opportunities for grants and notoriety to this issue. Specifically, it's centered around like cis white women. And so then like when that creates grant language and funding opportunities, then it spills over into like, this is what services look like, this is how services are named, and this is what they have to look like to kind of like fulfill our grant requirements. And so then that just kind of like continues cycles of like, this is how things have to look. And then we also spoke about kind of fitting into that too, how it like matches up with an idea of sexual violence being related to like physical power and like physical size kind of, and how that fits into a norm of like a cis man overpowering a cis woman, and how that's been a narrative tied to the history of the sexual violence movement over time.
Nice. So perpetuated by funding. I just want to make sure I capture all of this. That was, yeah, that's all super insightful. And then, yeah, the other thing that you said was just this idea, so kind of the history of the movement. So it's sort of, yeah, so I think you're speaking to kind of like how kind of the history of feminism kind of focused on this idea of like, yeah, violence equals physical overpowerment. Okay. Yeah, anything else? Anything about kind of the history of the movement? Or anything in general? Other folks want to, what did y'all talk about in your groups of how men and women fit into our traditional understanding of sexual violence and why? So I really don't believe in calling on folks. Please help me out with that. I don't want to do that to you.
Yeah, I just had another thought that came to mind too, of like maybe like what was traditional or maybe original definition of like just penetration type of assault. Yep. And then yeah.
Yes, right.
And how that like required a man and a woman, or cis man and a cis woman.
Right. So yeah, there was a lot of focus on like sort of the physicality of sexual violence and of rape, right? And like what, yeah. And yeah, like I remember reading in like my gender studies classes in college, these like feminist theorists who like said like all heterosex that was penetrative, penis and vagina sex is rape, you know, like just like there was this focus on like the physicality of that act and like how damaging it was psychically or something. Which, yeah. So where do queer and trans people come into that understanding of sexual violence? How, yeah, are they included? How does that work?
I was thinking through like it would be like individual like what someone individually likes or consents to, and what might feel or be experienced as assault, violation, non-consenting sexual activity in comparison with something like maybe that would have been based on assumptions on perceived gender, etc. So kind of needing to incorporate consent.
Well, I think there's also, yes, absolutely. And I think that there's also this implication like rape equals non-consensual penetrative sex, but sex equals penetrative sex, you know, like there isn't like like that is kind of what, that's like the understanding of kind of sex in general. And that's the implication. And that's not inclusive of all the ways that queer people and trans people have sex, or all the ways that anyone has sex, right? Yeah. Anyone else? Any other thoughts about how men and women fit into our traditional understanding of sexual violence and why? Let's see. And if folks are saying things in the chat, yeah, they're not. Okay. Yeah, I'd love to hear just one more before we kind of move on to the other two questions.
I don't think our discussion was that different really, but we just talked about, how the quote unquote tradition is how it describes it, and traditionally how society has viewed couples and has looked at cis men and women, and how that is just carried over, as somebody said, into the movement. And we haven't, we're beginning to change now, but I've been in the movement a long time, and we haven't really seen as much change as I would have hoped we would have seen, 20 years ago when I was thinking about this. So I think it's back to that word tradition and traditionally how we have.
Well, yeah, for sure. Does anyone know about I want to talk a little bit more about like the history of this movement. And I think I'm trying to see who it was in the chat who talked about, so Bethany talked about kind of how funding became about violence against women, but I want to kind of go back a little bit. Does anyone want to talk about kind of second wave feminism, if whatever you all know, and I can fill in a little bit just for my, undergrad gender studies education, about kind of conceptions of empowerment, relationships, violence, how inclusive they were of queer folks, what that was about. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? The last person who spoke, sorry, I'm looking for your name in the, I think I missed, was it Carrie who was just talking?
Yes. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. Thank you, Carrie. Yeah. It's interesting because this idea that the traditional understanding of all relationships as heterosexual, and it's sort of like sexual violence is corruption or of this this good thing, but it's interesting because the feminist movement is putting forth these ideas, and it's in certain ways trying to make these big changes, but is not upending heterosexual norms. Does anyone? Yeah. So I guess I wanted to kind of speak a little bit to, there was actually kind of a fight within second wave feminism around that. And there was this group called, so Gloria Steinem referred to lesbians in the movement as the Lavender Menace, because in terms of they would make the movement look bad. They would discredit the movement. And so folks at a National Organization of Women convention, a group of lesbians stormed the stage wearing, they ripped off their their clothes, and they had Lavender Menace t-shirts underneath, so there was there was a lot of kind of within the movement, there was this was contested, do we want to be inclusive of queer people or not, and there were kind of similar fights about whether to be inclusive of trans women, and I think the part of the movement that became funded was not the part of the movement that was necessarily inclusive of those folks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So yes, and I also want to thank the Queer History Podcast for telling me that. Okay. So yeah, and so what is limiting or liberating about this framework? And I think we've spoken about this a little bit, but does anyone kind of want to put a pin in it?
I don't know if I have a pin, but I did want to name that I appreciate you saying the Lavender Menace example, because I think sometimes both out of I think just wanting to think the best of things, I think of it as, it was not an intentional act of leaving out other marginalized people, but it's a good reminder for me that in fact it kind of was this sort of thing.
Yeah, no, it totally was. I mean, and I think, yeah, and absolutely there were, I guess I also want to name that the same things were happening with women of color, right? Who were like, wait a minute, this isn't about me. This doesn't apply to me, you know, and were intentionally, like in some ways intentionally being pushed out of this movement. And so we still are kind of facing the legacy of this in the parts of the movement that became like, you know, yeah, funded programs and physical buildings. Like now, like they've become like literally concretized structures of like that do not include the people that like weren't initially included in the movement, weren't centered. Okay. So what, I mean, you know, I'm not trying to throw out feminism, right? So like, I think it's important that we like honor like what has been like really liberating and meaningful about this framework and this work. So what are folks' thoughts about that? So we'll start with a good one. So we'll make it green. Let's hear from a new person. Is anyone who hasn't talked actually available and not like on a crisis call or like writing a grant report? Or even if you are, can you step away for like 30 seconds to answer this question? Let's kill. We got lots of colors to explore, so we can just do that. Yeah, does any thoughts about what is good about feminism? What do we like? What do we want to hold on to about kind of the second wave feminist movement that kind of led us to this point?
Hey, so I'm just kind of joining in right now. So I think I understand what we're kind of talking about. So I think like with feminism, like I guess a good thing about it is just kind of like the giving the voice, you know, the empowerment of it to those who have been oppressed for so long throughout history. So kind of moving on with like that, continuing to have that voice and that aspect of it.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. And thank you for being vulnerable and jumping in, even though you weren't sure if you were right, because you were right. Okay, so yeah, so feminism is aiming to like give voice and empowerment to those who have historically been oppressed and disempowered, you know, traditionally women, but like that's a piece of it we can hold on to. Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Anything else good or bad?
I would like to add something if I may.
Yeah, thank you.
I just like the fact that you know, it stands for whatever men can do, women can do as well. So I like that.
Yeah, like like equality of opportunity, possibility between genders, for sure.
Definitely, yes.
Yeah. Any other things that are like, I think, yeah, it's, I hear some background noise.
Sorry, that was me. I wasn't muted, and
Okay.
the office is very busy. I apologize.
No, you're good. Thanks so much for participating. Yeah, let me check how we're doing on time, and maybe we can just kind of sum up some of the limiting things that folks, yeah, maybe if we just want to reiterate kind of some of the negative things we talked about earlier. So, right, so it's not, you know, that it's not inclusive. That's kind of a broad one, right? Or like intentionally excluded, or yeah, like excludes marginalized folks, including LGBTQ. Any other thoughts about what is limiting about this framework? What else did you all talk about? Have all the groups shared? I feel like there were like 3 groups. Were Stephanie and Bethany, were you all in different groups? You were in the same group, okay. I wonder what happened to those other groups. Well, I'm glad you all had a rich discussion. Yeah, does anyone else wanna jump in?
I feel like something, I guess, negative. I feel like sometimes men feel like feminism is kind of like anti-men, or like, you know, they hate men or belittle them, you know. So I feel like that could be a negative or limiting tool to the work.
Yes, and I think I really appreciate that you mentioned that, because I think there's like a lot to kind of, there's a lot there. I think there's a lot of complexity there, and I think I like that framing, because I want us to kind of talk more, I want us to talk more about that as we kind of flesh out some of these ideas in later segments. So thank you so much for speaking up. Okay.
And since I was not in a group, I'll just consider myself my independent group.
There you go. We've heard from 2 groups. Okay. Cool. So we're gonna go back. Okay. Yeah, so this is kind of some more, so this one is where I wanted y'all to like kind of write or just reflect personally, how does the assumption that sexual violence equals male violence against women show up in your work? And so that could be like your organization's work or kind of your personal work in this field. So yeah, we'll give it like 3 minutes or so to reflect. Okay. Yeah, what did y'all would anyone like to share what y'all came up with? And you can do that verbally or in the chat.
I would say that there can be assumptions on the part of advocates or counselors or others in the work that the victim is female and the perpetrator is male. And so we have to be careful about that when we're responding. I also think it can limit opportunities for volunteers and for those that we have working with our programs. I think sometimes agencies limit that, not understanding that it can be beneficial to have many types of volunteers that should work with our program so that we can respond to all survivors.
Okay, yes. Sorry, I was a little, so limiting volunteers meaning like volunteers skew female.
Yes, so for example, like I've had experiences where there were male volunteers who wanted to volunteer for the sexual assault program, and there was hesitation. And I think sometimes that programs don't think about that, not all victims are female. So, and we've had experience where we had male volunteers who actually did a great job working with women in the program. So, right. Just thinking outside of those traditional views on all aspects of the program.
Yeah, it sounds like you're kind of naming two things at once. So like the program is kind of assuming that it's going that women so like service providers and programs themselves are assuming that women are going to be the primary folks that you're serving, or maybe the only folks that you're serving. So programs and staff assuming that participants will all be women. But then also it sounds like you're sort of alluding to like kind of a protectiveness towards clients and thinking like, oh, we don't want to trigger them, and having men involved in any like in programs as volunteers, for example, would be triggering.
Just making those assumptions of what we think that survivors need based on what we think, and when we should be talking to survivors about what they need rather than us making those assumptions.
Right. Assuming what survivors need, what would be triggering for them. Yes, absolutely. So we're going to link these two ideas. Okay. Yeah. Anything else that anyone wants to share?
I was thinking about biases in kind of like various like systems processes. So like a concrete example is that I work in a college, and so if a student is interested in a Title IX process, that conversation has to look very different if the student is not a cis white female, and because at that point, right, like there's so much that we don't have control over in terms of our own services, especially when we're sort of like consulting out for our I forget what they're called, like officials that like make these decisions and like run these Title IX processes with with a lot of our new regulations, and yeah, like how biases shows up in the process, and other people's conceptions of like what violence is, and interpretation of the policy based on the person who's like standing in front of you. And so that's like a Title IX example. And then I was also just kind of thinking about how that shows up other places, how like in North Carolina, we still have penetrative sex within our language. And these like various kind of like policy level battles, both within language and then also just how people interpret policies differently based on the person who's in front of them Yeah, in a number of different ways.
Do you want to say just a little bit more about that? So
yeah, so I think one piece is like actual policy language, like how policies are written, whether or not they're inclusive, and then also another piece about bias in interpreting policies, and how it can be applied differently for various types of relationships, or various types of individuals for like these kind of implicit biases that might show up, well, implicit or explicit biases that show up.
So maybe if like a man walks in and says, like, say something I've experienced in one of my internship sites, like, you know, a man would, well, first of all, would be like referred by the court system as a perpetrator, and then would enter the program and would say, look, I'm actually the survivor. And, you know, and someone, the service provider is not leaving a lot of room for that to be reality, for example. Is that kind of what you mean? Yeah,
that and or like just having a conversation with like a genderqueer student about how like this is right. Some of our Title IX stuff like gets recorded, it's kept in like a private file, and we can't kind of like guarantee that like proper pronouns are going to be used, and these things are recorded. Are you comfortable with things being recorded? Are you out in all spaces? So I think there's just like various levels of kind of
so like the legal system may not even recognize that trans people like that recognize their identities at all. Yeah, that's a really great point. Awesome. Okay, we are a little bit behind on time, although I'm really glad we had those rich discussions. So yeah, so we shared back. We don't have time for a break. I'm really sorry, but y'all, you know, step away if you need to. And now we're back on time. Okay. So moving forward into challenging this binary with sort of some of the statistics and reality. So 29% of trans survivors reported a female assailant. And so this is a quote from this organization called Forge that I work with, that is an organization that focuses on trans survivors of IPV and SV. And so when they first discovered this, they wrote, this appeared to be a trans-specific anomaly. But in researching, Forge found that about 1/4 of all sexual violence victims report a female assailant. Sorry, moving the little Zoom box around. Researchers in 2014, researchers assessed data on sexual victimization in 5 federal surveys that the Bureau of Justice Statistics, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, and the FBI conducted independently. So this is like a boring slide, but I'm just trying to say this is really good data. That's the point of the slide. This is like top-notch crime data. And they found that men experience sexual violence at about the same rate as women. So over 1 year, men and women are equally likely to experience non-consensual sex. So, oh, I can't see that number. I think it's 79%. Sorry, okay. Who were made to penetrate reported female assailants at female perpetrators, and most studies on female to female sexual violence among lesbians find rates over 30%. So these experiences were also violent when we go back to kind of that framing around kind of initial second wave feminism. So 58% of male victims and 41% of female, I think they should say female victims, so that's a typo, I apologize, reported a violent attack. Women behind bars are also 3 times as likely to be abused by fellow inmates than by male correctional officers. Okay, so now putting a question out to you, why this probably is like really different than data that you've seen, or maybe like it looked really different than what, you know, the Rape Crisis Center I worked at, what we had in our brochures when I started there. So why is that? Why do you think this is different than like what's kind of floating around in the popular culture? Like I remember I've heard like 1 in 29 men has experienced rape, for example. or sexual violence?
I was gonna say, I think a lot of it kind of comes down to what it's been kind of portrayed in like media as far as like what's been kind of normal, if that makes sense. Kind of just like through like like movies and stuff like that. And so then when for example, when males might report this sort of stuff, like it kind of just almost like slides off the shoulder, so to speak, because we are just so used to that always being the case. And even though that males might be more comfortable reporting it now, it's still kind of not registering with society as a whole.
Right. So maybe they were more comfortable kind of reporting in these surveys than they are to people in their lives or to service providers, for sure. Is there anything else? What about kind of the way that the data conceptualizes sexual violence? Any thoughts on that? I will just give you the answer on this one. Yeah, so like a lot of the previous statistics we've seen are defining sexual violence as penetrative rape. And this work does not define it that way. It defines it more broadly. Actually, I think I have all the answers on these slides here. So, oh wait, people were just saying things in the chat too. A lot of people don't report it and people don't see it as normal for men. So most of the time people believe, yeah, absolutely, for sure. Right, I think you're alluding to this kind of cycle, Kimberly, which we'll talk about in a minute actually, which is great. So also previous research excluded incarcerated people. So I think there's been a lot of talk about what that means, like who is disproportionately incarcerated in the United States. So yeah, who is excluded when we're excluding incarcerated people from our data, from our understandings of the world? Anyone? And yeah, you can put this in the chat as well. So we know that people of color are, are over incarcerated. There's mass incarceration in the United States. So yeah, to their kind of, I think this alludes to how our understanding of sexual violence is shaped, is like centers whiteness. And of course, those disproportionate rates of incarceration are because of systemic racism. And yeah, previous research narrowly defined sexual violence as rape, as we talked about, and who does that exclude? I know you all know it because we talked about it earlier. Yeah, so we know that excludes LGBTQ folks, right? And also, yeah, just the diversity of survivors' real experiences of sexual violence. Okay, so we're gonna do another little brainstorm situation. Let me make it small screen. Yeah, and thank you so much for staying engaged. I know I kind of advertise this as a very engaging training, and I feel like people were like, nah, everybody says that. All right. So yeah, what are the impacts of these assumptions? We kind of talked about them a little bit earlier, right? So what about like let's be a little bit more specific, like on real people. And so I think one thing that was alluded to is this idea, I think who said this? Kim, I think, was like talking about this idea of like, there's like this cycle where, yeah, so people don't report and people don't see it as normal for men, and then people don't report, right? So there's like this cycle of silence, maybe is a way to put it. Kim, does that kind of encapsulate what you were trying to say? Or were you the person who said that? Let me see. Kimberly, I apologize.
Yes, that's all right. Like a lot of men, they don't generally report it, and I mean, they don't feel safe speaking up because they don't believe that anybody will listen or understand them. So
Right.
they just generally keep it to themselves.
Yep, absolutely. They don't believe anyone will listen. Yep. Great, thank you. Oh, wow, that got blue, all right.
I have something to add.
Yeah.
So I feel like an impact would also be because of these assumptions, a lot of people, don't report, so the numbers will never really be very accurate.
Right, so the data stays inaccurate, our assumptions aren't challenged, yeah. And what impact does that have on like people involved in these systems that we've been talking about, like the legal system, the service provision system, maybe the criminal justice system?
I feel like it would kind of make it, minimize it, so it kind of downplays the problem because not people aren't speaking up and letting others know, like, hey, there is a problem out here, and
Yep. For folks kind of working in these systems. Yep, absolutely. I don't know why it's doing that. Okay, we'll just let it be weird. And someone said something in the chat. Services might not be offered if organizations don't see the need based on the data. Yes, absolutely, right? So there, yeah. Services aren't offered. Okay, great job, folks. That was an excellent top-notch brainstorm. So going back to the presentation, we kind of, I mean, I feel like you all really hit on all of the key points that these next slides cover quickly. So yeah, authorities don't believe male survivors or survivors with female perpetrators. And there's a quote from a report by Forge, a trans survivor. He said, "I was considered a male at the time. I didn't report because no one would have believed I was raped by a female." Research has also shown that psychologists and law enforcement are more likely to believe scenarios. They're like given these like written fake scenarios, they're more likely to believe those that involve male perpetration and female victimization. And survivors don't even recognize assault themselves. I think, that is like particularly pernicious or damaging, right? And I think we see these narratives in the media for example, like underage, children, boys, young boys, who, and I mean, I think it's complex in our work because we like want to defer to survivors' understandings of themselves and their own conceptualization of what happened. But, we see these jokes of like how boys are lucky to have experienced sexual abuse from women, for example, it's really everywhere. And so, this is another quote from a Forge report. "I didn't recognize it as sexual assault because it didn't fit the portrayed image, man assaulting woman." And so this is a place where, male survivors and LGBTQ survivors are all kind of similarly impacted. Okay, so how does survivors' own lack of awareness impact our work? Does anyone want to weigh in on that?
Maybe not feeling like they're eligible even for services or fit in or welcome.
Yes. Okay. So survivors aren't coming to us because they're like, this isn't for me. And then we are like, so just exactly like someone said about, we're not offering services based on the data. It's not that we're just not offering services based on the data. We're not offering services because men aren't stepping in the door. They're not, and so it's very much a cycle where services are tailored towards women. Men are like, don't see themselves in those images either. It's like very, yeah, very cyclical, which is why there's that little cycle icon there. Any last thoughts about that? Okay, let me just check up on time. Okay, we're like a little bit, like 3 minutes ahead of time. Okay, so now we're gonna try to do the thing where we figure out how to fix all this. It's feeling kind of intractable right now. So what do we do? So what elements of our traditional understanding of sexual violence do we want to let go of, and what do we want to hold on to? Like, we have this opportunity to change the way that we understand this work. And so we can do that. So let's kind of go back. Oh, okay. So there's a little person. This is you. This is your brain. So let's kind of move. This is what we're working on right now. So looking back at this framework, right, that we kind of outlined in the beginning, do you want to kind of point to, why doesn't someone just shout out something on this board that they want to hold on to and something that they want to let go of?
Hold on to empowerment.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that one gets to stay. I like it. I'm with you. Okay, what do we want to let go of? I see some thinking faces. Yeah, what do we want to do with all this?
I'm not sure if it's up there, but like letting go of like the binaries of it has to be male or female, or it has to be penetration or not penetration, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, we're just gonna delete it. It's totally up there. Yeah. So I feel like, yeah, I forgot to kind of flesh this out. This idea that feminism is anti-men, I have definitely heard these arguments from, what are they called? Oh, it's like an men's rights activists, MRAs, right? Who are like kind of anti-feminist men, that they'll say like, hey, men experience rape too. And that's their argument against feminism. And they're sort of throwing out all of their, like discrediting all of feminism, including these parts that we want to hold on to, including like equal rights, including maybe intersectional feminism, because they're like, hey, you're not acknowledging some of these really important realities of our lives, right? And they're right about that. And so that's a really easy way to kind of dismantle that argument, is if we acknowledge the realities of male experiences of violence. Okay. Any last thoughts about this? We have sort of a slightly bigger question that it's building to. Okay. How is this new information consistent with the feminist framework? So I want to like, we're kind of reimagining a like a feminism that encapsulates the facts that men also experience sexual violence at very high rates. Since we are kind of a smaller crew, I'm trying to think, do you all think we should still do breakout groups? I'm trying to think if that makes sense. Who do we got here? We have like 10 folks. Yeah, what do you think? Do you want to just do it in the large? I feel like y'all are not talking as much in large groups, so maybe small groups would be good. Yeah, so let's do 3 groups. Let me set that up here. And do you all see those requests? So you should be seeing requests to join rooms. Okay. Hey, Robin. We're just in breakout groups right now. We have a small crew.
Yeah, it's fine. Hi.
Hi.
Had to get my daughter straight. So,
No worries.
things are going okay?
Yeah, things are going good.
Good. Okay. I'll hang out until folks come back.
Sounds good. Cool.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hey, Nellie, it looks like you
are muted.
I was going to say something, but I didn't know if she was speaking to us or not.
Oh my gosh, that was really embarrassing. Thank you all. Okay. Thanks for bearing with me. Wow, we're like a year and a half in and I'm still doing that. Okay. Okay, so the question on the table is like, how do we want to shift and expand our current framework, right? So, and specifically, like, are there ways we can kind of build on feminist understandings to encompass these new facts, these new realities, or they're not new, but these realities that we're newly recognizing about male experiences of sexual violence? What did you all discuss? What did you come to? Let me see who is in the different groups. Okay, so it looks like one group was Bethany, Carrie, and Stephanie, and another group was Kim, Kimberly, and Sarah. Okay, let's hear from the Bethany, Carrie, Stephanie group first.
We kind of talked about, and yeah, you all feel free to jump into. We kind of talked about the idea of inherently seeing feminist theory as like should be kind of intersectional and looking at various types of oppression and how they overlap with one another. And so if you think about that from a very base level, that we should be kind of like incorporating these new facts to include other people, because then it, like you were kind of saying at the beginning, like then comes to serve everyone. Yeah, I don't know if other folks have thoughts.
Yeah, does anyone else from that group want to jump in? I love that. That's great. Yes, 100% agree. Carrie or Stephanie, do y'all have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think Bethany summarized it well, and just kind of the idea of broadening the scope to include, to be more intentional about including everyone who's experiencing harm, and tailoring services that way as well.
Sure. Yes. And then, okay, what about group 2? So Kim, Kimberly, and Sarah.
So we kind of touched base a little bit on like different ways, like as an agency to, you know, try to market materials and like these statistics to both like community partners, but also like on social media, just to kind of help with that stigmatization, if that's a word, of, you know, what is currently kind of going on.
Great. Okay, so y'all talked about kind of some really concrete things that you could do, which is awesome. I think that was like the next question. So it sounds like, yeah, you're jumping ahead, which is beautiful. I think like when I kind of think about this, I also kind of see a natural connection between feminism and building a more inclusive movement, not just because it's intersectional, but because, you know, I think we've touched on a little bit how gender norms, like there's a relationship between gender norms and it being difficult for men to come forward, or kind of the perpetuation of these ideas, right? Does anyone want to speak to that, or just like kind of get what I'm getting at there?
Yeah, so like kind of like the idea of like toxic masculinity and patriarchal norms being harmful for everyone, because then it puts men in boxes as well about like what roles are, and trying to like fulfill those, and so it becomes harmful for everyone.
Absolutely right. Patriarchal norms are harmful for everyone, and one of those is like the idea that men always want to have sex, that men always like sex, right? Those are things that are making it that men can always fight back, that they're always strong, that they can't be weak, that they can't admit vulnerability. These are all things that make it really hard for men to come forward, to seek services, right? And so when we are actively dismantling those norms, we're also like creating more inclusive spaces. Any thoughts about that? Yeah, I think that feels important. Thank you for articulating that, Bethany. Okay, so our final kind of thought discussion, which I think we can just do as a large, or did you all like the small groups? Was that useful to like end up back in those? Do you want to be back in your groups? I know, you're like, this is so much thinking. This is so much more thinking than we were expecting to be doing. So yeah, maybe we can, why don't we end early? Y'all have done some really heavy lifting with all the thinking, and I'm very appreciative of you, and you've made this beautiful mind map. So why don't we just kind of shout out or drop in the chat what, I feel like it is important to get concrete though, like I want to just let you go and take a nap or do really important work. You probably aren't napping. But I feel like I hate when I leave trainings and it's just like, okay, everything's terrible. We have some like vague abstract ideas about like how things should be different, So let's kind of just talk about what we can really concretely do to shift things and to bring them more in line with reality and more in line with kind of these new frameworks that we want to see. So what I would really love if everyone who's here and like still engaged could kind of commit to something that they are wanting to personally do to like make their spaces more inclusive to this kind of expanded understanding of who experiences harm and who perpetrates it.
I had mentioned it in my breakout group earlier that our agency here, we put out billboards that say stuff like, I believe it's stated facts, like, 1 in this many men are affected, 1 in this many women. I believe we put 4 out. Other things like, it can happen to anyone. So I feel like we really do got to get in that mindset to get those thoughts out of our head that, it's just the perpetrator is, male and then the victim is female.
Right. Yeah.
That's
great.
We really have to get rid of that mindset. Yes.
Awesome. So it sounds like one thing that you're kind of committing to is to making sure that those, what would you say, like PSAs or like outreach work is inclusive of these facts. Is that right?
Yes.
Great. Awesome. Anyone else? Maybe it would be good to look at the oops, sorry, don't want to move our little stick figure's head over here. So these are some ways that folks said that things were showing up in their work. So maybe these are some of the things that folks might want to change. Sorry, just drop, there we go. Come on, okay.
So I have a kind of a thought that I would be open to folks feedback in, just because we have like a lot of minds here that we've been kind of like throwing around in our office of how to make groups more inclusive. And so this is something we brainstormed a lot and not had a good solution for, because I've seen like the idea of kind of like an all genders group pop up, and that's something that we decided not to do because a lot of our clients do kind of express that, or a lot of our female clients specifically express that would be having males in group is something that would make them feel like unsafe or uncomfortable. And then we've also explore the ideas of like, does it make sense to do kind of like, oh, sorry, I should provide context. So we have a survivor support group that we run. And it always fills up with cis women, like almost always. And so we were trying to explore like, how do we provide more inclusive groups? And we floated around the idea of doing kind of like a trans specific group, because it feels like I work with a lot of trans and gender queer students, and it doesn't really feel like the space for those students. Like I think if one or two of them were to come into that group, it would feel not great. And we've explored the idea of kind of like trying to set better norms with group from the beginning. We've explored the idea of doing like an all male group, or just doing something like trying to advertise better about like, this is an all genders group. And yeah, have kind of like weighed the pros and cons of those different things, but I would be open to others' thoughts on this, because it kind of like fits into this, but then goes into some other things we've talked about like around like very valid reasons that yeah, services are tailored to women sometimes, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, who wants to respond to Bethany about that? I have hella thoughts about that, but yeah.
So I just accepted a position at the agency I work at now, because I wanted to offer more groups. So they already had a female specific sexual violence groups, and then a male specific, and then they wanted an LGBTQ plus support group too. So that's what my role is there now too. So now they have 3 groups, and kind of when they do have someone who expresses interest, they can kind of have that choice of those 3 options and kind of go to whichever group they feel the most comfortable in. And that's kind of what is going on over here.
Yeah, anyone else? How do you kind of navigate identities in groups specifically? So yeah, I had the role of like support groups coordinator at a RCC that had a pretty robust support group program. I changed the policy, you know, this was in Orange County. So, you know, I think whatever, people are in different places, and yeah, so this may not apply depending on where y'all are, but I changed the policy to be that every group was all genders by default, and then we would have one, like, then there would also be specific groups. So like there'd always be a female survivors group, because there is generally a demand for that. And then I practiced a lot of like discussion and informed consent around the process of like folks ending up in groups. And so I would say, okay, so these are the groups we have, like what feels like a good fit for you. You know, do you feel comfortable being in a group with folks who've had this experience or this other folks with this identity? You know, and I think that can be done without disclosing who might be in the group, because you could use a hypothetical, like, if there were to be a male survivor in your group, how does that feel? And you know, that like, yeah. And so there was a lot of kind of thought that would go into the composing of the groups, I guess. And yes, we also had an LGBTQ specific group that we would partner with the local LGBTQ center to put that group together. And I tried to run male survivor groups, and I had a lot of trouble finding enough folks, right? But yeah, Forge, that org that I mentioned earlier, has a really great webinar and maybe other resources on putting together all gender groups. And that was kind of what led me to that, was I was sort of swayed. They talked about how, you know, there is sort of this, I think that we can be somewhat, maybe the word like overly protective or like patronizing in our work around trying to create like these perfectly safe spaces where like nothing bad can happen. And that can be the reality is that like we don't know every survivor's trigger. Like survivors are going to get triggered in our services. They get triggered all the time. They're going to get triggered in groups. And so rather than try to create spaces where that can't happen, like how do we build resilient spaces in which we can like work through those things, you know? And by kind of shying away from that and trying to make everything like perfect and safe and like protected, like in this little bubble, we are kind of doing a disservice to the movement, to our clients, to ourselves. I don't know. That's like my 2 cents.
I think that that is a very valid point, and I definitely agree with that. I think that that happens often in programs, and I think the other thing to think about and remember is that programs are seen in a certain way in their communities oftentimes. And so, you know, we can't expect if the agency has this reputation of serving women, cis women, cis white women traditionally, or however the community may see this program, and it depends on who their supporters are and all those things, then I think we just can't expect that many diverse groups will all of a sudden start coming to us because we say, hey, we're going to offer this fabulous group now. And so it's just going to take time to build up that trust within our communities.
Yeah, and I think, yes, and I think one really important way to do that is by building relationships and coalitions with other groups and other organizations. And that's another way to put, right, like going back over here to like intersectionality, like a way we can put that into practice is by building relationships with like other communities and building like, and that takes time too, right, to like build trust, you know, and that may look like going to like someone else's volunteer day, or like, you know, like it can be a process, but you know, yeah, what if you were to partner with like some kind of like men's self-help organization, or like reach out to like therapists who work with male survivors, or like just some thoughts. And certainly like LGBTQ centers, or even like men's like faith-based organizations, you know, may be more open, maybe like also like formerly incarcerated. There's like some programs and communities for folks leaving the prison system. Those folks may be more open to, you know, are disproportionately likely to have experienced SV, and maybe more open to kind of talking about it as they're reimagining their lives. So
Yeah,
And I agree. I mean, I agree with what you were saying, Carrie, as well, Nolan, because, you know, the part of our services are supposed to be survivor informed, right? So if we ask them and they say no, or and populations aren't monolithic, right? I, as a cis Black woman, may want to go to a traditional one. You know, where, you know, as far as I'm concerned, you're supposed to, you know, make it inclusive. This is supposed to be normal. You know, we're supposed to be creating this environment where, you know, whether I'm a Black woman, whether I'm a trans woman, whether I'm a Latinx person, I should be able to walk in your service and get the same. That's what we're talking about with equity, right? I should be able to walk in and get the same. So we're supposed to be building that within our community, within our service. I mean, it goes back to what you said. There's a willingness to have these folks have different cultures come to our service if they want to. And this training is helping us to do that. What do I need to do? But as we talked about, everybody's mentioned, and I know I came on this late, we have to build trust with those communities.
It takes time.
And what we try to do, I don't know what it's like. So that, you know, that's why we hire trainers and contractors, build relationships to teach us, you know, what should we be doing? How do we reach out? What does that look like? You know, and build that trust. And we actually in CICASA, through our sexual assault services program, fund culturally specific organizations. and then teach them how to reach out. And what does that look like you said, Anoli, by building relationships with traditional organizations, but historically, culturally specific organizations, is that's why we fund them, don't have the money. They're not funded the same way. And so we should try to partner with them to build their capacity for a ongoing relationship, right?
Right. It's a really great point that there's also ways that we can shift these resources that have historically privileged like white women's spaces to other. That's a really great point. Yes, thank you. Yeah, I also want to just let folks know about a very, oh gosh, I like don't remember the web address right now. There was a play, I want to say it's like malesurvivors.org, but maybe Google male survivors. And there's like an organization that has a message board. And if you post it's free to post your support group on that message board. And that's a way that male survivors find each other and can find your work. Sorry, it just came into my mind. I didn't prep it. Yeah, okay, so we have like maybe 3 minutes. I really appreciate this very organic and dynamic conversation. Does anyone else want to commit to what? Yeah, I think we've come up with some great ideas. What do you specifically think that you're going to be doing differently?
You know, if I could add something else we encourage folks to do, you know, like Harry mentioned, you know, the name of your programs. Thanks, Alexandra. Is that it? If I say the Women's Center, did we talk about that already? I don't want to.
No, we haven't, and it's such a great point. Yeah.
Right. If I say the Women's Center,
right.
Ain't no men gonna come because it's a women's center.
Right.
And if I say that it's the name of your program, you're already advertising who you are looking for, who you are reaching out to just by the name of your program, you know? And so that's important too. Even if you have to explain, even though if you have a program called Transforming Hope, right? I don't mean to say because it was an actual name on the program, but we see those kind of names for like human trafficking agencies, those kinds of names, stop slavery and all that kind of stuff. So I don't mean that to be disparaging, it's just the truth, right? And so who are you reaching out to, right? Human trafficking agencies, victims they don't see themselves as slaves. They don't, and so the name of your organization, your mission, really, if you got like taglines where you can then say Transforming Hope, our mission is to be inclusive, and we do something like that, that could help, but it's got to be short and it's got to be like an infomercial, right? You're going out, you say the same thing, you got this tagline. That's something else we need to consider.
Right. And so kind of the language that we're using for sure. Okay. So in these last couple minutes, I want to why don't y'all just drop in the chat, like what you're committing to do, make these commitments to each other, to yourselves. I did see some folks are already doing that, which is great. Some conversation from earlier. Someone had the idea, I think this is feedback from Shannon to Bethany. Maybe we could y'all could leave a bi-weekly all gender group meeting that folks can enter when comfortable, or if comfortable, that's kind of the standing group. I think that's a great compromise position or idea. Thank you, Robin, supportive of open groups. So yeah, if folks want to commit to other things that they're doing in the chat, and then I'm going to go ahead and drop the evaluation link. And if you want to go ahead and complete the eval. And that is pretty much it. I'm just going to share with y'all my contact information. Thank you so much for your time and engagement. You can reach me at Anoli Halper anoli.halper@gmail.com or my website, anolihalper.com. And I'm always happy to talk more about these things. So feel free to hit me up. Thank you so much, everybody. And we will get out of here. Yeah, I'll leave it open just so everybody can grab that link and write their commitments in the chat. And I will go ahead and end the call at 3 o'clock like planned. Thank you.